Everything you've been told about relationships is a lie. You think love is about honesty, openness, being yourself. You think if you give more, explain more, prove more, they'll finally understand you. But that's exactly why you're losing. You're not failing because you're not good enough. You're failing because you don't even realize you're being tested every single day. And the worst part? These tests are invisible. They're never announced, and they're designed to make you expose your weaknesses without you noticing. There are 3 tests your partner is constantly running on you. Miss even one and something shifts. Respect drops, attraction fades, control slips. The last test is the most dangerous because by the time you recognize it, it's already too late. And this is where it gets dangerous. You see, your partner isn't just reacting to what you say. They're studying how you respond under pressure. Not consciously, not logically, instinctively. Because human attraction doesn't follow fairness, it follows hierarchy. Who bends first? Who explains more? Who seeks approval? That's the game you didn't know you were playing. And right now, you're playing it wrong. Let me show you something you've probably experienced but never understood. There's a moment when your partner says something slightly disrespectful, not direct, not obvious, just enough to create tension. A small jab, a sarcastic remark, a subtle comparison. And what do? You laugh it off, or worse, you explain yourself. You try to fix the moment. That right there was a test, and you failed it. Because the test was never about the words, it was about your reaction. This is the part no one admits. When you rush to defend yourself, you signal something deeper than insecurity. You signal that you're afraid to lose them. And the moment fear enters the dynamic, power leaves your hands. Not instantly, not dramatically, but quietly. Like a slow leak you don't notice until everything feels different. Conversations feel heavier, they interrupt you more, they stop taking your words seriously, and you can't explain why. But here's what you didn't notice. They're not losing respect because of what you said. They're losing respect because of what you revealed. Your need to be understood, your need to be validated, your need to win back control in moments where you already lost it. And once someone sees that, they can't unsee it. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. You think you're different. You think you're more self-aware than most people, that you wouldn't fall into these patterns. But if that were true, you wouldn't be here. Something in your dynamic already feels off, something you can't quite name, and that's why you kept watching, because deep down, you felt the shift, the subtle loss of edge, the quiet change in how they look at you. The way they test you more and respect you less. Yes, more tests. Because once someone senses weakness, they don't stop. They escalate, slowly, strategically, until you either collapse or become someone they can no longer control. There's a specific reason they started testing you in the first place, and it's not what you think. It's not because they're toxic. It's not because they don't care. It's because you taught them how to treat you without realizing it. And now I'm going to show you the first test, the one almost everyone fails, the one that quietly destroys attraction before anything else does. Most people won't admit they failed this. If you already see it, comment, "I see the game."
Now pay attention, because this first test is so subtle, most people mistake it for normal behavior. It's called the emotional stability test, and you've been failing it in ways you don't even realize. Your partner doesn't need to ask if you're strong. They don't need to question your confidence. They provoke it. Small delays in replies, sudden shifts in tone, pulling back attention for no clear reason. Not enough to cause a fight, just enough to create uncertainty. And then they watch. They watch how quickly your energy changes, how fast you go from calm to confused to reactive. That shift, that's the answer they were looking for. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because in that moment, You think you're trying to fix the situation. You send another message. You ask if something's wrong. You try to bring things back to normal. But what you're actually doing is revealing dependency. You're telling them, without saying it directly, my emotional state depends on how you treat me. And the moment someone realizes that, they gain leverage over you. This is the part no one admits. Attraction doesn't grow when everything is stable and predictable. It grows when there's tension, uncertainty, a sense that the other person isn't easily shaken. But you remove that tension instantly. You rush to restore balance. You can't sit in silence. You can't tolerate ambiguity. You can't let things breathe. So you chase clarity. And in doing that, you destroy your position. Because the one who needs clarity the most holds the least power. Let that sink in. The one asking what's wrong is already below the one who caused the question. And you've been asking it more than you think. But here's what you didn't notice. Your partner isn't always doing this consciously. They don't sit there planning tests like a game. It's instinct. Human beings are wired to probe for stability, to push and see what moves. And when they push you, you move immediately, every time. And that consistency, it makes you predictable. And predictability kills respect. Now here's the dangerous part. Once they know how to trigger you, they don't need to test you anymore. They control the dynamic. A delayed reply can shift your mood. A cold tone can change your behavior. A small withdrawal can make you chase harder. And suddenly, you're not responding to them. You're reacting to their control. That's how power silently transfers. Not through arguments, not through dominance, through emotional dependence. And this is where it gets dangerous, because the more you react, the more they lose the need to invest. Why would they? You're already giving them everything just to feel stable again. Your attention, your energy, your emotional focus, all handed over without resistance. Now let me give you a truth most people aren't ready to hear. Calmness is power. Not fake calmness, not pretending you don't care. Real, controlled stillness. The ability to feel the tension and not rush to eliminate it. The ability to see the shift and not chase it. The ability to let silence exist without needing to fill it. That's what passes the test. But you weren't taught that. You were taught to communicate more, express more, fix things faster. And that conditioning, it's exactly what makes you fail. Because in this game, the one who reacts first loses. Now here's the question you need to ask yourself. How many times have you felt that shift and immediately tried to correct it? How many times have you broken your own frame just to feel normal again? Most people won't answer that honestly. If you can, comment, "I stayed still," because very few people ever do. And this is only the first test. The next one is worse, because it doesn't just expose your emotions, it exposes your boundaries. And once that's compromised, everything else follows. Because this is the test that quietly rewrites your entire position without you ever noticing it happen. It's called the boundary test. And unlike the first one, this one doesn't come as tension, it comes as permission. Your partner doesn't push you aggressively. They don't demand control. They take it, inch by inch. A canceled plan without real explanation. A joke at your expense in front of others. A moment where your time, your standards, your comfort are treated as optional. Nothing extreme, nothing you can clearly point at and say this is wrong, just enough to make you pause. And that pause, that's the test. And this is where it gets dangerous. Because in that moment, you have two instincts fighting inside you. One says, say something, that crossed a line. The other says, don't overreact, keep things smooth. And almost every time, you choose smooth. You let it slide. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. You convince yourself that addressing it might create unnecessary conflict.
But what you don't realize is this: every boundary you don't enforce gets rewritten. Not verbally, not consciously, but behaviorally. They learn exactly how far they can go with you, and once they learn that, they go further. This is the part no one admits. Respect is not lost in one moment. It's eroded through tolerated behavior, slowly, quietly, permanently. And you've been tolerating more than you think, because you confuse patience with weakness. You think being chill makes you attractive. You think avoiding confrontation keeps the relationship stable. But stability built on ignored boundaries isn't stability. It's silent submission. Let that sit with you, because right now you're remembering moments. Moments you brushed off, moments you minimized, moments where something felt off but you said nothing. Those weren't random, those were data points, and your partner was collecting them. But here's what you didn't notice. They weren't just testing your limits, they were measuring your self-respect. Because the way you allow others to treat you is the clearest reflection of what you believe you deserve. And people adjust accordingly, not out of cruelty, out of calibration. They meet you at the level you present. And if you present flexibility where there should be firmness, they assume there are no consequences. Now, here's where it becomes irreversible. Once someone internalizes that you won't enforce boundaries, they stop checking, they stop hesitating, they stop respecting the invisible lines you never defended. And at that point, even if you suddenly decide to stand up for yourself, it feels unnatural, forced, even to them, because you trained them to expect nothing, and now you're trying to change the rules mid-game. That's why they resist. That's why they push back harder. That's why it turns into conflict instead of correction. You waited too long. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because deep down, you knew. You felt the shift the first time it happened, but you ignored it. Not because you're weak, but because you were afraid of losing the connection. Afraid that asserting yourself might create distance. So you sacrificed respect to preserve closeness. And in doing that, you lost both. Now here's a truth most people won't accept. People don't respect the boundaries you explain. They respect the boundaries you enforce. Calmly, clearly, without hesitation. Not emotionally, not aggressively, but with certainty. And that's the part you've been missing, because you thought boundaries were about words. They're not. They're about consequences. Subtle ones, controlled ones, but real. The moment your boundaries have no consequence, they stop existing. Now ask yourself this: where have you been too flexible? Where have you allowed things you knew you shouldn't? Most people won't answer that honestly. If you can, comment "no more access," because that's where this changes. And we're not done, because the final test is the one that decides everything. It determines whether you're seen as replaceable or irreplaceable. And once you fail it, you don't get another chance.
This is the one that ends it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. It's called the scarcity test, and almost no one sees it coming because it doesn't feel like a test. It feels like distance. Less attention, less excitement, less effort. They stop leaning in, they stop initiating, they stop giving you the same energy you once had. And your instinct? You try to bring it back. You text more, you show more interest, you try to remind them of what you had. You start performing, and that is where you lose everything. Because the moment you start chasing what's pulling away, you confirm the worst possible thing, that you need them more than they need you. And this is where it gets dangerous, because attraction doesn't follow effort, it follows value, perceived value. And value is shaped by one thing most people are terrified to control: scarcity. Let me show you the truth you've been avoiding. When your time is always available, when your attention is always accessible, when your presence feels guaranteed, you become predictable. And predictability turns into invisibility. Not immediately, but slowly,
like background noise that was once music. They don't notice your absence because there is none. They don't fear losing you because you never make them feel it's possible. So they stop investing. Why would they chase something that never leaves? This is the part no one admits. The more you try to prove your value, the lower you leave it. Because high value doesn't explain itself. It doesn't chase validation. It doesn't rush to reestablish connection when it fades. It observes. It waits. It lets the other person feel the gap. But you close the gap instantly, every time. And in doing that, you remove the only force that creates desire: uncertainty of loss. Now here's where it becomes irreversible. Once someone feels they have you completely, without effort, without risk, without consequence, they stop seeing you as a choice. You become a constant. And constants don't get prioritized. They get taken for granted. And eventually, they get replaced. Not because someone better came along, but because something less predictable did. Let that sink in. You didn't lose because you weren't enough. You lost because you made yourself too available to be valued. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because part of you knows this. You felt the shift, the way they stopped trying the same way, the way their attention became inconsistent, the way you started caring more and they started caring less. That wasn't random. That was the moment the scarcity test was failed. Now here's the truth that separates most people from the few who never lose their position. Scarcity is not about playing games. It's about having a life that doesn't revolve around one person. It's about having standards that limit access. It's about being willing to walk away without announcing it. Because the strongest position you can ever hold is the ability to leave. Not threaten, not manipulate, but genuinely detach when the dynamic no longer respects you. That's what makes someone irreplaceable. Not effort, not loyalty. Self-respect expressed through controlled absence. And this is where everything connects. You failed the emotional test by reacting. You failed the boundary test by tolerating. You failed the scarcity test by overgiving. Reaction, tolerance, overavailability. That's the pattern. Break that and everything changes. Ignore it and everything repeats. Now here's the final truth. Most people will hear this, feel exposed, and do nothing. They'll go back to reacting, back to tolerating, back to chasing, because change requires something most people don't have: discipline over their own impulses. But a few people will recognize themselves in this, not defensively, but honestly. Those are the ones who shift the dynamic. Those are the ones who become impossible to control. If that's you, you don't need motivation. You need one decision. Where will you stop reacting? Where will you enforce a boundary? Where will you remove access? Don't answer it out loud. Prove it in behavior. Most people won't. If you understood this on a deeper level, subscribe, not for more content, but because you see what others refuse to see. And before you leave, comment the one rule you will never break again. Or stay the same. That's what most people choose.